Before this story continues, allow me to say something important. The story you are about to hear is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes, focusing on toxic family dynamics and the emotional impact they leave within the context of military life and American military families. All characters' ranks units, events, and circumstances are entirely fictional and do not reflect, or imply any real individual unit or organization of the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, or Coast Guard. This content may be supported by AI tools during creation and production. The story does not depict real events, does not disclose military information, and does not promote violence, hatred, or harm of any kind. The message is told with respect for the core values of the United States military, including honor, discipline, responsibility, and human dignity. The entire narrative is built to be advertiser-friendly, aligned with YouTube community guidelines, and does not aim to misrepresent or damage the image of the U.S. military or its service members. If you are a woman who has stood behind a military family who has stayed silent, endured, and carried more than others could see, stay until the end. And if this story touches you, share your thoughts in the comments or follow the channel to continue with stories for strong hearts that are rarely heard. My name is Noah. I am 26 now. I serve in the military. I do not talk much. I watch. I remember. This story moves between two places and two times. Killeen, Texas in the summer of 2011 when I was 14, and the present day in 2023 when my parents decided to come back into my life. There is my mother Pam, who has always cared more about how things look than how they feel. There is my stepfather Rick, who loves lectures and hates being wrong. There is my sister Holly, the golden child, who learned early that jokes could cut and still sound sweet. There is Mrs. Decker, our neighbor, who believed in rules and quiet responsibility. And there is Sergeant First Class Alvarez in my unit, who does not raise his voice and never bends a process. I did not understand then how all of these people would intersect, but they did. The moment that still lives in my body happened on a hot afternoon, when the driveway shimmered and the air smelled like dust. I was 14, standing in the doorway with my backpack still on because I thought we were running errands. My mother rolled a suitcase past me. Rick checked the lock on the car. Holly laughed and said it would be quiet without me bothering her. My mother kissed my cheek and said, "You are old enough," Rick added, "do not embarrass us. We will be back before you even notice." They said it like a promise and a warning at the same time. No number on the fridge, no neighbor informed, no plan written down. A credit card left on the counter that was not activated, and a single $5 bill folded thin like an apology that did not mean it. I remember the sound of the door closing. It was clean and final. They called it independence. I called it no adults. I stood there longer than I should have. I waited for the car to turn back. It did not. That was the first, breathless moment. The second came when I checked my phone and saw no missed calls. The third came when I realized nobody knew I was alone. I did not cry. I did not scream. I made a sandwich with what was left and told myself this would be a story I would tell later with a laugh. By night, the house felt larger and emptier. The ceiling fan clicked. The fridge hummed like it was apologizing. I slept with the lights on. The days that followed were quiet in a way that pressed on my chest. There were no messages. There were posts from Europe glowing with smiles and captions about freedom. I tried to be normal. School, cereal, laundry. I smiled when friends asked about my parents. By the end of the week, I was dizzy when I stood up too fast. I told myself I was fine because that was the word they liked. Fine is useful. Fine makes other people comfortable. One voicemail came through from Rick. "Do not be dramatic." Holly texted, "LOL, you are basically grown." My mother said an automatic reply saying she was unreachable. That was when something inside me shifted. I did not argue. I timestamped. I wrote dates and times. I wrote what was missing, groceries, rides, adult signatures. I wrote what was said. "You are old enough. Do not embarrass us." I did not know I was building a record. I just knew that if something happened to me, I did not want anyone to say they did not know. That is the part people miss. Neglect is not one night. It is a process. Years later, the military taught me the same lesson in a different language. If it is not documented, it did not happen. I joined in 2016. I learned how readiness depends on accountability. I learned how access credentials, housing compliance, sponsorship, and family readiness are not favors. They are responsibilities. I learned that paperwork saves lives. My family laughed at that. Paperwork, they said it like a joke, but they were not laughing when they needed it. This is where the meaning of when they came back changes. They did not come back with apologies. They came back when they needed something, a signature, a verification, a compliance letter tied to a family event that required access and housing alignment. It was ordinary on the surface. It carried weight underneath. My mother said, "You owe us." Rick said, "Do not make this a thing." Holly joked that I had always been weird about rules. They did not ask. They ordered. They pulled other people in. They threatened embarrassment if I did not help. I listened. I watched the way they used we as if I still belonged to them. I felt the old pressure to fix things for adults who had not fixed things for me. That was the build, the escalation you can feel before the break. I said one sentence: "It does not qualify." The public moment did not happen in a hall or on a stage. It happened in a small administrative space with neutral walls and a desk log open. Sergeant First Class Alvarez said, "We cannot override this. It is on record." The room changed temperature. My mother went pale. Rick started to argue. People outside our family heard the refusal and understood it. That is public humiliation when it is real. You do not get to control the narrative. You do not get saved. Someone said, "Wait for Noah's final verification." Not my rank, not my title, just my role. That was the twist, the power they never saw because I never showed it. My mother whispered, "No, this cannot be happening." I did not answer. I observed. I hurt. I locked it away. Later, they came back again, softer this time. They said they did not mean it. They said I was being harsh. I said I was alone at 14. I am not doing that again. There were consequences, no exceptions. And here is the value if you stayed this far. This is not a story about a child being pitied. It is a story about justice that does not shout. It does not break rules to feel good. It lets the process do its work. When they came back, it was not to a reunion. It was to a record. If you were ever told to toughen up so someone else could feel better, stay until the end. The first few days after they left did not feel dramatic. That was the problem. There was no emergency sound, no knock on the door, no obvious moment where someone would say, "This is wrong." There were just gaps, no calls, no messages. I checked my phone in the morning and at night and then again before sleep, even though I already knew there would be nothing. The silence had a rhythm. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they were busy adjusting to time zones and trains and museums. On the second day, my mother posted a photo of herself in sunlight, holding a coffee cup with a caption about finally breathing. I did not comment. I did not like it. I folded laundry and poured cereal into a bowl that was more air than food. At school, I laughed at the right moments. I said, "Yeah, they are traveling," when people asked. After class, I walked home alone and unlocked the door like I always had, except this time there was no sound of anyone else inside. I cleaned because cleaning makes things feel under control. I washed a single plate and set it in the rack like it mattered. That night, I stood in the kitchen and counted what was left. Bread that would go stale, milk close to its date, cans that required an adult strength I did not have. I made another sandwich and told myself this was fine. I will be fine. I said it out loud. My hands shook anyway. By day 3, the small things started to sting. There was no ride when an after-school activity ran late. I walked the long way home under a sun that felt heavier than usual. I drank water to quiet the hunger because that is what you do when you do not want to admit you are hungry. I opened the fridge and closed it again without taking anything because I was doing math in my head about how long it had to last. At the store, I realized I could not buy what I needed because some things require an adult signature, and some things require more than $5. I stood there longer than necessary pretending to read labels so the cashier would not ask questions. I felt lightheaded when I stood up too fast and had to hold the counter until it passed. There was no violence in that moment. No one raised a hand. But my body noticed the absence anyway. That night I called my mother and got a recorded message that said she was unreachable. The word unreachable sat in my chest. I called again and again and listened to the same calm voice telling me not now. Rick left a voice note later that night. His tone was half amused, half annoyed. "Do not be dramatic." That was all. Holly texted me a single line with laughing letters saying, "Lol, you are basically grown." I stared at it longer than I should have. It was a joke to her. It landed like a verdict to me. I did not respond. I learned something important in that moment. They were not worried. They were comfortable. The next morning I woke up dizzy and sat on the edge of the bed until the room stopped moving. I told myself again that I would be fine because that word had become my shield. Fine kept people from asking questions. Fine kept the story clean. At school I smiled and nodded and did not tell anyone that my stomach hurt or that I was counting hours until I could eat again. I walked home and did a load of laundry because clean clothes feel like order. When I tried to heat soup, I burned it and scraped the bottom of the pot until it was thin enough to eat. I washed the pot immediately so there would be no evidence of my mistake. That was the day I realized abandonment is not one night. It is a series of small decisions that pile up quietly. It is not a shout. It is an echo that never comes back. The posts from Europe kept appearing, a museum, a street at dusk, a caption about freedom. I did not comment. I did not tell myself stories anymore about when they would call. I started to notice details instead, dates, times. What was missing? I did not argue with the silence. I documented it. I opened a notebook and wrote a schedule, not a diary. Monday, no call. Tuesday, no text. Wednesday, voicemail unreachable. I wrote what I could not do. No groceries, no ride, no adult signature. I wrote how I felt without drama. Dizzy, hungry, fine. The word looked strange on the page next to the facts. I realized that if something happened to me, I wanted there to be a record that could not be dismissed as exaggeration. I wrote because writing slowed my breathing. I wrote because it made the chaos line up. I wrote because arguing would have changed nothing. I did not argue. I time-stamped. That sentence formed in my head without effort and stayed there. The days blurred into each other. I learned how to eat smaller bites. I learned how to sit down when the room tilted. I learned how to answer questions with half-truths that did not invite follow-ups. I learned that adults can say, "You are old enough," and mean they do not want to deal with it. I learned that jokes can bruise. On the 7th day, I called again and listened to the same unreachable message. I did not leave a voicemail. I wrote the time instead. That was when the feeling shifted from confusion to something harder. This was not an accident. This was a choice they had made and kept making every hour they did not check in. The injustice was quiet, but it was complete. I was not being loud about it, and that seemed to make it easier for them to ignore. The notebook became my anchor. It did not ask me to be brave. It asked me to be precise. If you are watching this and wondering whether writing things down is too much, or whether it is self-defense, tell me honestly in the comments, because that question matters. By the end of the first week, I understood something I had not before. Waiting for them to notice was not a plan. Protecting myself with facts was. The value in those small entries was not drama. It was clarity. Each line was a brick. I did not know what I was building yet, but I knew it would stand. By the time summer ended and school started again, the silence had already taught me more than any adult explanation ever could. I did not confront them when they finally called weeks later. I did not ask for apologies. I learned something else instead. I learned how to exist without asking permission. Between 2011 and 2016, I moved through life quietly. I learned how to fill out forms myself and how to read the fine print adults skip. I learned how to keep my head down and my options open. I learned how to leave early and how not to wait for rides that might never come. I worked small jobs, I saved, I paid attention. When people offered help with conditions attached, I said, "No, thank you," and found another way. By the time graduation came, I had already decided what came next. I did not announce it, I did not ask for approval. I signed my name and left. In 2016, I joined the military. It was not about proving anything to my family. It was about choosing a system where responsibility had names and consequences. Training was not easy, but it was honest. If you failed a task, it was written down. If you passed, it was written down. Nobody cared how you felt about the record. They cared whether it was accurate. That suited me. I was assigned to work where paperwork does not look heroic from the outside but keeps people alive. Readiness, accountability, compliance, schedules that decide whether someone has what they need when it matters. The rule was simple and unforgiving. If it is not documented, it did not happen. Veterans understand this rule. It is not cold. It is fair. I watched how plans fell apart when someone skipped a step, and how lives were steadied when someone followed through. I learned how access credentials worked, and why housing compliance exists, and how sponsorship is not a favor but a duty. I learned how family readiness depends on adults doing what they said they would do. At home, my family still joked about paperwork. They said it like a punchline. In uniform, it was the opposite. Paperwork was the spine. I did not talk about my work much. When my mother asked what I did, I said admin and let her underestimate it. That was fine. The years between 2016 and 2023 shaped me without drama. I became precise. I became calm under pressure. I learned when to speak and when to let a process speak for me. Somewhere in there, my name started moving through rooms without me. Not loudly, correctly. I would know things a little earlier than others, not because I was special, but because I paid attention and read updates when they posted. I would answer calls with the right words and the right tone. Copy mom or copy sir, and the line would end. I had access to administrative systems that required trust and consistency. Nothing glamorous, enough to matter. My evaluations came back clean and then better than clean. A line about reliability. A line about attention to detail. Top performer appeared once and then again. I did not frame it. I did not share it. People who need to announce power usually do not have it. I kept doing the work. When Sergeant First Class Alvarez spoke, he did not waste words. He respected process and expected the same. We did not bond over stories. We bonded over things being done right. There were moments when my family would call and complain about forms and timelines and say, "It should be easy." I would listen and say that easy is not the same as correct. They laughed. They always laughed. I did not correct them. I remembered the notebook. I remembered how facts sit quietly until someone needs them. By the time 2023 arrived, I was not angry anymore. Anger is loud and heavy. I was organized. I had learned that retaliation is not necessary when structure exists. I had learned that systems do not respond to tears or arguments. They respond to records. When I walked into rooms, people expected me to know what was on the agenda, and I did. When questions came up, I checked the log and answered without opinion. That was my quiet resistance. It did not look like revenge. It looked like competence. There were breadcrumbs even my family could see if they wanted to. Short calls that ended quickly. The way people waited for my confirmation before moving on. The fact that my name appeared on things that mattered. They did not ask what it meant. They did not think it applied to them. They never do until it does. If you are watching and you think you already know who Noah really is in her unit, say it out loud in the comments because that instinct matters. The value here is simple and hard to accept. I did not need to strike back. I did not need to embarrass anyone. I had position and process and the patience to let them work together. When people hear the words when they came back, they assume it means regret. They picture a hug at the door and a soft apology that fixes the past. That is not how my family returned. They came back the way a bill comes back after you have tried to forget it. Quiet at first, then unavoidable, then suddenly urgent. It started with a call from my mother on a weekday afternoon when I had just finished checking a readiness list and closing out a routine log. Her voice was bright, like we were friends who had spoken yesterday. "Hi, honey," she said as if the last decade had been normal. I did not correct her. I listened. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask if I had time. She went straight to what she needed. "We have a situation," she said. "A letter came to our house about housing compliance and access. Something about a family readiness requirement. It is ridiculous. We have plans coming up and we cannot deal with this nonsense." I knew what she meant before she even finished. When a household is connected to a service member, there are rules that do not care about excuses. Mailing addresses, authorized occupants, guest stays, documentation. My mother said it like it was a personal insult. She said your unit must have messed something up. I let a pause sit there long enough to be noticed. Then she softened her tone like she was offering me a compliment. "You handle paperwork all day. This should be easy for you." I could hear Rick in the background coaching her. "Tell her to fix it. Tell her it is her responsibility." Then Rick took the phone. He did not bother with the sweet voice. "Noah," he said, "you need to take care of this. We are not asking. We are telling you. Do not make this a thing." I looked at my screen, and then at the calendar on the wall. I could feel the old reflex to smooth it over. The reflex that says, if you keep adults calm, you will be safe. That reflex did not fit me anymore. I asked one question. "What exactly are you trying to do?" He huffed like I was wasting his time. "We have a family event in a couple weeks," he said. "People are coming in from out of state. Your sister has commitments. We need access cleared and the compliance letter handled. Your mother says there is a problem. Fix it." It was the first time in years I heard the word need from him without any concern for what I needed. My mother jumped back in. "You owe us," she said. "We raised you." I stared at the word raised in my mind like it was a document with a missing signature. Raised. The house in 2011. The $5 bill. The unreachable voicemail. The do not be dramatic voice note. My sister texted while my mother was talking. She always been weird about rules. That was Holly. She could still make a cut sound like a joke. I did not respond to the text. I did not argue with the call. I listened to the way they used we. We have plans. We are stressed. We need this fixed. We cannot deal with it. They spoke as if I was still part of their household, and as if my role was still to cover for them. Some parents miss you. Mine missed control. That sentence landed in my head clean and sharp. I could feel the tension in my throat. Not sadness, exactly. A familiar pressure of being assigned a job I never applied for. My mother kept talking, and the unfairness climbed one notch at a time. She reminded me of school supplies she bought, and rides she gave, and dinners she cooked, as if those things erased what she did when she chose a plane ticket over me. Rick added his own lecture about family image and how people will talk if there are issues with compliance. He said, "Do you want your name attached to this?" He said, "Do not make us look bad." It was the same old script with new words. I could hear the escalation in the way he tightened every sentence. He was not asking for help. He was issuing instructions. My mother said, "If you do not handle it, we will have to tell people you refused." She said that would be embarrassing for you. She said you are supposed to be responsible. My sister chimed in through a group text with a fake innocent tone. "Just sign what they need, Noah. Stop being difficult." Then she added a little laughing face like it was playful. I did not laugh. I did not defend myself. I felt the line tightening between who I used to be and who I had become. They pushed harder. They threatened to call someone else. They said they would speak to my command. My mother said I know people too. She did not. She only knew how to bluff. Rick said we will come down there if we have to. He said you do not want a scene. The irony almost made me smile. They had no problem leaving me alone at 14, but now they were willing to travel to pressure me about paperwork. That was the moment the wire went taut. Their need was not regret. It was entitlement. Their return was not love. It was extraction. If you have ever been turned into a tool by your own family, tell me one line in the comments. because people pretend it does not happen until someone finally says it out loud. I took a slow breath. I pictured my notebook with dates and times. I pictured the rule that had shaped me. If it is not documented, it did not happen. And if it does not qualify, it does not move forward. I spoke in the same voice I used at work when someone tried to push a process with emotion. It does not qualify, I said. The line went quiet. Then my mother asked, "What do you mean it does not qualify?" Like she could not imagine a world where her want did not become reality. I did not explain. Not yet, I just repeated it. It does not qualify. And in that second, I knew the storm was coming because people who rely on control do not handle a closed door well. The request did not explode the way my family expected. There was no dramatic confrontation and no raised voices in a hallway. The process moved the way processes do when they are followed correctly. The paperwork was reviewed and returned with neutral notes and a scheduled administrative briefing set for clarification. It was a small room with plain walls and a table that had seen better days. No banners, no audience, no ceremony, just a few chairs and a quiet hum from the air system. My mother arrived first with her practiced smile and a stack of papers she thought would solve everything. Rick followed, carrying irritation like a second jacket. Holly lingered near the door, scrolling on her phone like it was all beneath her. I took a seat and placed my hands on the table. I did not introduce myself because everyone already knew my name. The official running the briefing spoke in the same even tone used for every case. He reviewed dates and requirements without commentary. When my mother interrupted, he raised a hand gently and continued. "The request has been returned," he said. "There are compliance issues tied to access and housing that have not been resolved." Rick leaned forward and said, "This is ridiculous. My daughter works here. This can be handled." The official did not look at me. He looked at the record. "We cannot override this," he said. "It is on record." The words landed with the weight of a gavel, even though no one intended them that way. My mother blinked and then laughed softly like it was a misunderstanding. She turned to me. "Noah, say something. Fix this." I kept my eyes on the table. The official continued explaining next steps in a calm list that did not include exceptions. That was the first escalation. Confusion. My family did not understand why their usual pressure did not work. The second escalation came quickly. Rick pointed at me and said she is refusing to help us. He said I was being difficult and vindictive. Holly chimed in saying she always has been weird about rules. My mother said she raised me to be responsible, and this is how I repay her. The room absorbed their words without reacting. I did not respond. Silence is not weakness when the process is speaking for you. The official glanced at the log and then said, "We will need final verification before this moves anywhere." He looked up briefly and added, "Let's wait for Noah's final verification." He did not say my rank. He did not need to. Everyone in the room understood the function being named. That was the moment the air shifted. The third escalation arrived quietly as people outside our family began to see the situation clearly. Another staff member entered to take notes. A woman from housing asked a clarifying question that made it obvious the issue was not personal, it was procedural. My family realized they were not alone with their story anymore. They were being observed. My mother leaned closer to me and whispered that I was humiliating them. Rick said this would look bad for me too. He said people talk. I watched the official mark a box and move on. No one took their side. No one asked me to explain myself. That is what public humiliation looks like when it is real. It is not loud. It is the absence of rescue. The official repeated the sentence again when Rick tried a different angle. "We cannot override this. It is on record." My mother shook her head and said, No, this cannot be happening." Her voice cracked on the second no. That was the line she would later pretend she never said. I looked at her then and felt the old ache rise and settle. Observe hurt lock. I did not speak. I let the process finish. When the meeting ended, there was no victory speech. There was only a clear outline of consequences and steps that did not bend. As people stood and gathered papers the way they do after ordinary briefings, my family stood still. They were being looked at differently now. not with cruelty, with clarity. Outside the room, my mother tried again. She said, "Please, just this once. Rick said you are making us look terrible." Holly rolled her eyes and said, "This is so unnecessary." I did not answer. The question everyone was asking without saying it was whether I would save them. If you were in my place, would you save them or let the record stand? Comment save or let it burn? I walked away because the decision had already been made by the system they tried to ignore. The value of that moment was not revenge. It was the realization that power does not need to announce itself. It only needs witnesses. They came back quietly this time, not with demands on letterhead or raised voices in offices, but with soft tones and careful timing. My mother called first, late in the evening when she knew I would be home. She said she just wanted to talk and that things had gotten out of hand. Rick followed with a message that said, "We need to clear the air." Holly sent nothing at all, which somehow said the most. When we finally sat across from each other in a small neutral place, they chose words that felt practiced. "We did not mean it," my mother said. "You know how stressed we were." Rick nodded and added, "You are being harsh about this. Families help each other." He said it like a rule, not a request. The gaslighting came in circles. They reframed abandonment as miscommunication. They reframed pressure as concern. They reframed consequences as my choice. My mother reached across the table and said, "We raised you to be strong and independent. You should be proud." I listened without interrupting because interruption gives people room to argue. Silence forces them to hear themselves. Rick said, "We never thought you would take it this far." That was the admission hiding in plain sight. They expected me to bend. They expected access the way they always had. I felt the old instinct to explain rise and then settle. Observe hurt lock. I placed my hands flat on the table and said one sentence. I was alone at 14. I am not doing that again. The room went still. My mother opened her mouth and then closed it. Rick frowned and said, "You are holding on to the past." I said another sentence because the outline required it and because it was true. You called it independence. I remember it as abandonment. There was no anger in my voice. That is what unsettled them. Anger can be argued with. Calm cannot. They tried again. My mother said, "We are family." Rick said, "People will think badly of you." Holly finally spoke and said, "This is embarrassing." I did not defend myself. I did not list receipts. I did not threaten. I repeated the boundary in different words. I will not override the process. There are no exceptions. They asked what that meant for them, and I told them exactly what it meant in practical terms. The paperwork would remain returned. The access would remain restricted. The housing compliance issue would follow the standard timeline. Their travel plans would adjust accordingly. No exceptions. The consequences unfolded without drama. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls from people who once assumed favors went unanswered. The quiet privileges that had smoothed their lives evaporated. They lost leverage, and with it the confidence that had carried them. It was not jail, and it was not public shaming on a stage. It was worse for them because it was ordinary. Doors did not open. People paused. Records mattered. My mother called again a week later with a different tone. She said she missed me. She said she was proud of who I had become. I listened and said thank you and did not change anything. Rick sent a long message about forgiveness and moving forward. I replied with one line, "No exceptions." Holly posted something vague about loyalty. I did not respond. If you were Noah, would you give them another chance and why? That question belongs to you. For me, the payoff was not seeing them suffer. It was standing inside a boundary without apologizing for it. Justice does not need applause. It needs consistency. I went home and did not announce anything to anyone. The door closed with the same sound it always made, and the quiet felt earned instead of heavy. I set my bag down where it belonged and washed my hands, and made coffee the way I always did, measuring without thinking, because routine steadies the body before it steadies the mind. I folded laundry and checked the schedule for the next day, and answered nothing that did not require an answer. There was no parade, no phone lighting up, no message that said you won. There was only sleep that came easily for the first time in a long while. In the morning, I woke up before the alarm and stood at the counter while the coffee finished and watched the light move across the floor. I thought about how peace does not feel like fireworks. It feels like breathing without bracing. Some families do not break you with fists, they break you with absence. They leave a space where guidance should be and then call it strength when you learn to stand there alone. The hardest part was not being left. It was being told it was normal. I carried that lie longer than I carried the hunger or the dizziness or the fear of a locked door at night. Lies like that stick because they ask you to doubt your own memory. When people asked later how I could be so calm, I realized calm was not the absence of feeling. It was the presence of order. Order gives feelings a place to land. Justice is not revenge. It is the refusal to keep covering for someone else. It is letting the record stand even when it hurts people you were trained to protect. When they came back, it was not to heal anything. It was to recover leverage. By then I was different, not harder, clearer. I understood that being reliable does not mean being available. It means doing the right thing the same way every time. I moved through the day and did the small things that build a life. I checked readiness items and answered straightforward questions and thanked people who did their jobs well. I did not scan rooms for danger. I did not wait for a voice to tell me I was dramatic. In the evening, I cooked a simple meal and cleaned as I went and sat down without the noise of old arguments replaying. I thought about my mother and hoped she would learn to live without shortcuts. I thought about Rick and knew he would keep blaming the system until the system stopped listening. I thought about Holly and wondered if she would ever learn the difference between being favored and being protected. None of that required my intervention. I set boundaries and the boundaries did their work. People often imagine justice as a loud ending. It is quieter than that. It is paperwork completed and requests returned and meetings that end on time. It is someone else realizing you are not the person they can move anymore. It is a house that stays still when you walk through it. It is sleep that does not ask for permission. When I turned out the light, I did not feel sad exactly. I felt resolved. Sadness had done its job earlier by telling me something was wrong. Resolution is what happens when you listen to that message and act without cruelty. The story does not end with forgiveness because forgiveness is not a requirement for peace. It ends with clarity. When they came back, I did not step aside. I stayed where I was and let the process speak. That is the kind of ending that lasts.